One of the greatest privileges that I have being a YouTuber, if you will, and a podcaster is getting to meet quite a few really awesome people in the Andy Auth community. And that's one of the reasons why I want to showcase someone that actually I had worked with previously about a couple of years ago. And also someone who is absolutely crushing it over on TikTok right now. So if you're an author and you're curious, is TikTok going to be the avenue that I want to explore? Then you want to actually sit in on this conversation with my good friend Wayne, otherwise known as W.A. Blinko, and we discuss some of his unlikely journey to becoming a successful TikToker, and also how he was able to overcome dyslexia and be able to put out a few books in the process. So why don't we go ahead and tune into this interview? So Wayne, I have always been so fascinated with your growth over on TikTok, and I definitely want to tap into that area, and I'm sure we're going to probably hang out there for a minute. But let's lay down the foundation, like what brought you into this game and such. What inspired you to even get into writing and publishing the books that you do?
Basically, I was a teenager, and I just kind of decided that, to me, the kind of films and stuff that was making popular was rehashes of old stories, reboots, sequels, even way back in the mid-90s. And I just decided I could do better myself. So I kind of got all the ideas together. My mum inspired me quite a lot. She gave me some of the names for my characters. And once I'd started the process, the fire never really died. And I am, and people might not be aware, but I'm also dyslexic. So when you look at the start of my writing career way back in the mid-90s, computers and technology wasn't where they are at now, so it was extremely difficult. But I would be constantly scribbling down notes and story elements, and I padded it all out. In my head, I've got it all sorted, so I started to draw in those elements and plot points and things. Then I had to kind of put it on hold for a second because being dyslexic, things just kind of get in the way. You have a blank in your mind, you can't progress, and your head just goes really fuzzy, and you do struggle for inspiration, and what you're saying has got to make sense for the reader. And there wasn't really, I didn't know then what the future would install, so it was always like an ambition. And then in the late 1990s, early 2000s, obviously computers and I was going to say hard drives, but word processors kind of kicked up, and they were on a slightly different level. So I started toying with the idea again. And again, it was just really, I suppose, another 5 years after that, I got my first computer with proper word processing software, with spell checker and everything else. So I just typed out the story, and I was happy with it then. And I was trying to get a publisher at the time, not very successful. So again, life kind of takes over. You need to earn money to pay the bills. So I just carried on with working. But every second and every spare moment that I had was always the story of my characters, where they're at, what they're doing. And then coming forward, as I got older, I just thought I've seriously got to do this. And I was watching some of your channels and other self-publishers, Jenna Morossi as well.
Oh, love Jenna. She's so awesome.
I got a confession. I come across Jenna Morossi first before I come across yourself.
Totally fine. Jenna is just the GOAT when it comes to all the self-publishing area, honestly.
Yeah, and I loved what she was, her presentation in the videos, what she says, and her whole persona kind of really inspired me again to think, I'm getting on. I'm all right. I'm mid-40s, but if I don't do this now, I am never going to do it. So I set myself the goal of getting myself published and everything else, and I was all set to go, and then COVID struck.
Yeah, that seems the start of everybody's story.
Yeah, and all of my promotional ideas, it's like I was going to drop books off in areas where people like free libraries, so people can just pick up a copy just to find and discover me as an author.
Smart.
And I had all these ideas about what I was going to do with everything, and I couldn't do a thing. But at that point, I'd also written the sequel to Broken Ceasefire.
Yeah.
So as I started to go through the development, and I learned that you need to have a good cover, it needs to be properly edited just to make it look professional, so you don't look like an amateur author, even although technically you probably are.
Right.
So I'd done all of that, and it wasn't until I'd started going through the editing process for the first book that I thought, well, hang on a minute, the gap between Broken Ceasefire, which at the time was called Rakshan, because that was the idea that I was going to go along. It was going to be Rakshan, and this was going to be the Rakshan trilogy of books. But again, logic kind of kicks in and thought, well, no one's going to know what a Rakshan is. No one's going to be searching, oh, let's look for Rakshan. So I then decided to change the book title to Broken Ceasefire, because it makes a good title, and it's something that's going to be searched for, whether for historical information or current affairs or anything. It just kind of suits what I've done with the story. But then there was the sequel, which was going to be called The Escape. And I looked at what I'd done for The Escape with the completed, re-edited and publishing ready-to-go version of Broken Ceasefire, and realised that there's too much of a gap. So I need to write a new sequel to fill the space. And that's what I've been working on. And obviously I've done various courses. One of them, as we said earlier, I've done a Challenger course with yourself, and that's how Xander's Salvation came to fruition through that course. And that's really kind of put me in a position where I can, once I've done the sequel to Broken Ceasefire, which is now called, I think it's Return Fire, then I'll be ready to go with The Escape, which will be renamed again to fit what I'm going to call like the Fire trilogy. So it's going to be Broken Ceasefire, Return Fire, and possibly Crossfire as a series of books.
Ah, smart. You're really going down into the whole branding area. You want to make sure people know who W.A. Blinko is.
Yeah, definitely. And so once I've done that trilogy, and theoretically I've only got one book to write, I'll be able to launch that and kind of think of it as job done, which will then allow me to concentrate on the characters from Xander's Salvation, which is all set in the same universe with the crew of the ship of the Salamander. So I see that story going off to be a bit more like the Expanse kind of thing, where there's just going to be space truckers that things happen to, but what they do will influence other bits in the story in the wider universe. Because I have also got ready to go, edited and everything else, Tango Squad, which is a little bit more, and this is where writing these things randomly, I've got to sit down and put them in the correct timeline. But Tango Squad is set before the trilogy that I'm going to hopefully finish off, with a different group of characters, but they're interlinked. So you're going to find out a bit more of my main character's background and history in these other series of books that I'm writing. So
nice. This is really cool to see, like, you're really building this out, and you're not just thinking of short-term, like the short-term plan. You're looking at the bigger picture. So this is pretty awesome. I want to kind of go back to something you briefly touched on, and I think it's so important to highlight something like this, because how much you've accomplished is absolutely extraordinary, considering that you're having to work with dyslexia. Explain to some of the listeners here, what is dyslexia, and what type of complications does that put on your writing process?
First, the biggest problem with dyslexia for myself, and obviously I can only speak from my own perspective because everybody's different, but for an overview for myself, it's that block. I have, if I could take my brain out, connect it into a computer, and just the stories would flow. There's probably about 9 or 10 books in my head, desperate, screaming at me to get out.
Yeah.
The flow of the words. It's also how I think sometimes. I might word a question to somebody in a way that makes total sense to me, but to the person asking or receiving the answer or question, it might be that I've worded some of it backwards. So they don't necessarily understand the full extent of the question that I'm asking. So that's one thing. It's kind of like a thought process where you do things slightly differently to other people, and I possibly think a bit more black and white. Things give me a grey area and I really kind of confuse and get kerfuffled. But give me black and white, yes and no, and that's a lot easier to handle. The other thing with dyslexia is everybody says if you want to be a great author, you have to read. It took me 6 months, I think, to read Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. And that was because when I'm reading, I have to go back and reread half of what I read before because the retention isn't there. And I think this is something that's influenced my writing, because when I started off writing, and you'll see the difference if you pick up Broken Ceasefire, the first chapter is about 15 pages. Then the chapters kind of narrow down in size. And as I've gone through the process with my new works and other books, I now shorten the chapters. So I've done 24 chapters of the sequel, but they're only 1 or 1.5 pages long. So I've kept it right down, brought it right down into bite-sized chunks to write. Because my way of thinking is, when I want to actually publish it and get it ready to publish, I can then look at what I've done in, say, chapter 5 and compare it to how it follows up to chapter 8, and I might be able to put those 2 chapters together to make one chapter of a reasonable length. So that's one thing. It's handling the information and processing it in bite-sized chunks. It's a big deal for me, and anything too long or just too much information is no good for me. So I've also taken to listening to audiobooks as an alternative to reading, because then it takes away the process of concentrating on the words in front, making sure, because dyslexia, sometimes the words are jumbled around, or B's and D's get mixed up, and the English language is impossible when there's 2 different witches and I think 4 different woods. So listening to audiobooks is a great help as well, and not necessarily science fiction, because my content is military science fiction. So I would listen to stories by Andy McNabb, because they might not be science fiction, but they're military, and they can give you a kind of grounding on what military structure is and how they actually perform in combat situations. So I think that's roundup of my dyslexia.
It's pretty interesting, and I find it's awesome that you have stuck to it and not given up this whole time. I mean, obviously you've been, living with this, and it seems like you're processing it pretty well. This is great information, but let's say, for instance, a listener is dyslexic and they feel discouraged, and they're not really sure what that process is going to be like, say, after writing. What does it look like for you? Do you put it through Grammarly or Pro Writing Aid? No, not plug here, folks. I'm just asking him here. Everybody's like, oh, here he is. He's going to Pro Writing Aid. He's trying to sell some stuff. What does that process look like for you, going from your first draft to your final draft?
The wife.
The wife. Excellent.
I do the chapters. I obviously use Microsoft Word, and I go through the options that you have with that, so spell checker and the grammar options, and then I kind of get my other half to read through it as well, so that it makes sense. Because you might have, and this is something again with being dyslexic, you might have a sentence full of perfectly spelled and grammatically correct words, but if they don't make any sense to the reader, then they're no good.
So true. Waste of space.
So my wife will read through what I do, and she will correct the spelling, and she will also help, because the American spell checker sometimes kicks in on a UK program. So I think apologise is spelt with a Z for the US, but in English it's S. And she'll pick up on them kind of things and do that. And then the process is Grammarly, or I did do Grammarly, but then there's also another option which I haven't used for a while because I haven't needed to.
Use what you need. I mean, you don't really need. I guess that's really interesting though. So your wife obviously is in sync with you, so she knows sometimes when a sentence is a little off, she'll probably go, "Oh, I know Wayne by now. I'll be able to just plug in this sentence, no problem."
Or she'll just say to me, "Oh, what do you mean by this statement?" Because again, I think also being dyslexic, you can be a little bit too wordy, because you don't see it as being wordy, you see it as conveying the information.
Yeah.
So you might use 6 words instead of 3 or 2.
Well, I think this is so fascinating, and especially you're still relatively new to the game of self-publishing. This is the part that blows me away every single time, and something that I said at the very beginning here of this conversation was TikTok. My Lord, what the heck is happening to you on TikTok, dude? So tell me, like, what was your inspiration upon of getting over onto TikTok? Was it to sell more books, or was it just kind of just like a passing fancy of yours?
I have a YouTube channel as well, and the YouTube channel's kind of run a bit flat. I'm finding YouTube very difficult to get traction on.
It can be.
So I thought, well, TikTok was the in thing. It was a new platform, and I thought, well, rather than compete against established authors, creators with that millions of followers, it's a new platform. Let's jump in and see what I can do with it and where it can take me.
Yeah.
And part of the emphasis with being a writer is you need that author brand. So after various hit and miss ideas, because it's difficult sometimes to nail down your niche and to do it well, to draw in an audience, I just thought, well, I love pop culture. So I love Star Wars, Star Trek, Godzilla, Marvel, DC, the whole thing. I haven't got a particular show or anything that I would stand by and say, this is absolutely what I will die for, apart from Aliens, but then Aliens is something altogether different. But I also love trivia. So I thought, well, why not combine the two? Yeah. And I started off doing short videos on TikTok with me doing the video saying basically like in 1978 DC and Marvel actually got together to create Spider-Man versus Superman. So that is a crossover that actually happened, and like that. But you had 15 seconds, so I literally jabber for 15 seconds, and the feedback that I got from my sister was, great video, but you're talking very quick.
But there's a lot of videos that are like that, like Good Morning, Bad News, I think it's like the name of, like, the guy rattles off like he's the Micro Machines man.
Yeah. And so after a little bit of toying around, I kind of looked at what was working on TikTok, and I noticed a lot of the face morphing videos were getting a lot of traction. So I thought, well, I can do that. Yeah. But not only can I do that, I can put my spin on it, which is to give you the trivia as text. So I think one of my videos, well, Superman, for example, Christopher Reeve. So I can take Christopher Reeve from his early days right up to, unfortunately, him being in a wheelchair. Yeah. And as we go through that process, so you can see how the actors aged, Christopher Reeve put on 40 pounds for the role of Superman.
Wow. I never knew that.
It's quick and simple. And people are entertained because they can see the difference in the actor, and they're being informed with some trivia. So that has then spawned onto other things. So now my YouTube channel is focusing on movie trivia. I've also gone on to a podcast about movie trivia. But what got me with TikTok was the ease of the videos, and just it's something that I enjoy doing. And this is the biggest thing. So I thought, well, this is a way of engaging with like-minded film buffs, geeks, nerds, whatever you want to call us. We're just fanatics about film. And I thought, well, this is a great way to actually build an audience of like-minded people with myself. Yeah. With the goal of getting 1,000 followers, because once you have 1,000 followers on TikTok, you can then do the lives. Yeah. And I thought, so the strategy was get to 1,000, get to the point where you can do lives, and then engage with people. Because when you're talking to people online, that's when you can turn around and say, oh, by the way, I've done this, I've done that. These are where you can buy them.
It's a smart content marketing strategy, and especially how much work you're putting into it. Like 15-second videos. How long is that taking you to produce one single video?
5 minutes.
Oh my gosh, you got to be kidding me. And how many followers are you at now?
46,500.
46 and a half. We'll just round it up. It's 47,000, because I'm sure by the time this comes out, you're probably going to be above that, because I've watched your journey. And I remember one of the times I came on the live, I think I might have saw, am I mistaken when I say this? It wasn't just dozens of people. It was like hundreds of people that were tuning into you.
The lives, I've got a regular audience of around about 15 people that are total regulars. So they will tune
Okay.
in. They've bought a copy of the book. They're into me as an author, and this is the whole point of doing TikTok, is to engage with the audience.
Yeah.
I do a live every single Friday, so people know that it's the consistency. If you're going to do something, whether it be TikTok, YouTube, podcast, it's the consistency.
Yeah.
People need to know where to find you. But yeah, I mean, my stats are quite. I'm really chuffed with all of my stats. So I started on the 17th of July 2020.
Okay.
So literally, mainly because I was scratching my head thinking, what can I do during the pandemic? So that was when my first video went out.
Yeah.
I've now done 720 videos on TikTok.
Wow. This is
Yeah.
crazy. Now, mind you, while we're recording this, folks, this is on like March 17th of 2022. So now
Yeah.
you've got a timeline of how much work he did within the time that he had. This is incredible. Wayne, I wish I could dive deeper into some of
Yeah.
these analytics, but unfortunately we're getting towards the end of the podcast.
No,
I
that's
have
fine.
to ask you one last burning question here.
Yeah.
And that is, what advice do you have for aspiring authors and self-publishers?
Stick with it. If your heart is in it, stick with it. Don't be put off by other people telling you it's a pipe dream, because you don't know what's around the corner. And if you're enjoying it, what does it matter? This is the biggest thing. If you're enjoying what you're doing, does it really matter if you sell billions of copies or just half a dozen? Because it provides me with enjoyment, and I know I've provided enjoyment to half a dozen people at least. So if you're enjoying it, do it.
Big shout out and thanks to Wayne for taking some time out of his day to spend some time with us, folks. Make sure you go take a look over at WA Blinko, or it might be Wayne Blinko. Either way, you'll find him over on TikTok, or go over to wayneblinko.com. You got all the information you need right there. And show him a little bit of love. Tell him Dale sent you on over there. In the meantime, I will catch you guys in next week's interview.